over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our next webinar this morning. We are going to talk about toxic cultures and the importance of really taking care of your culture within your company, and how you can do that in two key ways, through embedding effective one-to-ones and also tackling difficult conversations head on. Before we drop into the webinar content, I'm just going to introduce the Curve Group really quickly and give you a heads up in terms of what we're going to cover in more detail. So if you're not aware of who we are the largest privately owned recruitment HR outsourcer in the UK, and we actually provide configurable solutions across the entire employee life cycle, as you can see with our lovely wheel on the right hand side. And we do that in a number of ways. So we have core outsourced solutions that we provide for businesses, and we also deliver a range of more technical specialist consultancy projects and programs too. And the beauty of what we do is that we can actually configure and shape all of our solutions to kind of meet the needs and the sort of wants of any size business. So that is the Curve Group. Our mission is very much focused on sort of transforming working lives, and we're very, very proud of what we deliver. So thank you, Della. You've just flashed up just a handful of some of the awards that we've won in recent years. We have lots more than this, but we're very passionate about doing the right thing, supporting our clients and candidates and customers, as demonstrated by some of the awards that you see before you. So my name is Sam Pusey. I'm head of bids and marketing at the Curve Group and work with our subject matter experts internally to produce all of these lovely webinars for you. I'll be handing over to my lovely colleague Della Wolf very shortly, who's co-founder of the Curve Group, so since day one, and also consultant. So she delivers a lot of different HR projects, recruitment projects for a variety of clients, and she will be taking you through the body of the webinar today. Thank you, Della. So in terms of what's coming up, if you want to flick through all of these, I mentioned at the top that first of all, actually, what we're going to do is, before we dive right into the sort of main body of content, is look at what an impact a toxic culture can have on your business, and actually on the flip side, what a good culture looks like, so you know where to start from and what to aim for. We're then going to really focus and drill down on the role of line managers, because they are absolutely key to company culture. And then we're going to start to dive into sort of the area of difficult issues and conversations a little bit more, giving you some tools and recommendations on how to manage those, which can be tricky. We appreciate that. We'll bring a bit of an example to life as well. And then we'll also then jump into sort of moving forwards on a more positive note, what good one-to-ones should be looking like between line managers and employees, and how you can go forwards and embed those within your organisation. We'll then finish off with our sort of top tip, key takeaway slide for the kind of key messages that we want to make sure that you're taking away with you today. And then we'll bring up any questions at the end. So there should be options for you to pop any questions into the Q&A box at any point throughout the webinar. So if you have any as we go, please feel free to drop them in there, and then we will discuss them and we'll answer them at the end if we haven't covered off the answers throughout the webinar. Alternatively, you've just seen our emails really quickly, but we've got those that will come up later too. So if you have any questions and you'd rather take it offline, then feel free to get in touch with us afterwards. But hopefully it'll be a good 30 minutes worth of content for you and will prove useful. I will hand over to Della now to launch into the deck. Thank you, Della.
That's great. Welcome, everybody. So in terms of what we have stated as our aim for the session today, it's to enable you to understand how to foster meaningful one-to-one sessions and manage difficult conversations, obviously with an intention of turning your company culture around. Now, obviously with company culture, this is just one element of it, but we felt that that was quite important to link that back to that company culture piece. So if you look at the real impact of a toxic culture in an organisation, so we talk a lot at the moment about increased attrition. I think increased attrition has two elements of it. One is obviously the opportunity cost, both in terms of recruitment again, but also the impact of those around, not least in terms of training and making sure that we are bringing people up to speed quite quickly, and the effect that has on those that are remaining in the business. There's also an increase in employee relations issues and the complication and sometimes the damage that those can cause in an organisation as well. Impact on mental health. Certainly we see this in the organisations we work with. as a real theme, certainly coming out of the more recent pandemic. Also, a lack of productivity. Both we've talked about the attrition, the impact that can have, but just generally people aren't feeling that they are comfortable in their company, in the role they have, then we see an increase in productivity. There's reduced governance in terms of the overall process and the management of the business potentially, and ultimately damage to brand. And I think we can see some really good examples recently, the P&O one being a very good example of a toxic culture and the ongoing damage that is causing to their brand. So let's look at the flip side. So we've looked at the negatives and some of the things that can impact. And here's just a few. Now, we could probably spend more than a half an hour today talking about what good company culture looks like. But for the purposes of now, we just need to share some of the thoughts on what does a good company culture look like. So it needs to have a strong employee value proposition, something that the whole business can get behind, that people are comfortable in working and feel actually really proud of working for that business. The values need to be meaningful. It's not just about lovely, beautiful framed document on the wall, and they need to be brought to life and be meaningful, and people can understand what their role is in delivering those values. And also behaviours are seen as positive and reinforced positively as well. Which leads on really nicely to a workforce that is collaborative, is supported, people feel that sense of belonging and feel comfortable in how they're contributing. A proactive and motivated employee certainly is something that people enjoy working with people that are motivated to come to work, that want to come to work, that enjoy their role. So getting that proactivity and also motivation right is a massive part of what good company culture is. And then lastly, that strong brand. We talked about in the toxic, the damage to brand, but actually people working within a culture that have that want to work for the brand, but also it makes it very attractive when companies are going external. So it's attractive externally. I said lastly, I have one, and that alignment and that sense of purpose, that everybody feels like they're going in the same direction and they're aligned to that ultimate company belief. So when we look at line managers, I think I did a webinar recently on attrition, and I think I spent quite a lot of time in that talking about how important line managers are. And here we are with a webinar around difficult conversations, meaningful one-to-ones, and again we're talking about how important line managers are, and I make no apology for that. So they need to have responsibility and accountability, so understand the role that they have, where that starts, where that stops, but taking accountability for that is really important. Dealing with issues and opportunities, so where we see line managers working really well is where they're seeing something and they're reacting to it, but also not just that kind of issues meaning negative, it's also about seeing as opportunities. And we've talked about reinforcing behaviour, making sure that they're actually seizing those opportunities to promote, to be proactive about that as well. They need to be approachable, kind of hopefully common sense over line managers, be honest, be fair, transparent. We see within companies we're working with where people are being treated differently, where team members don't understand what their role is, where someone's seen as being treated differently from someone else. Those are all things that can lead to a negative company culture. And then also committing that time to make time for team one-to-ones, and I'll talk about that in a moment as well. Ensuring that line managers follow up and deliver, do what you say you are going to do. And then lastly, with line managers, we talk to them about if you need help, seek the guidance, seek training or support so that you feel you have absolutely the right tools to do the role. So I think we're probably quite clear there that line managers are indeed quite key. So let's talk about then managing difficult conversations. So we split this webinar into two. We're going to talk about difficult conversations first, and then we're going to talk about one-to-ones. So we have our lovely man here on our hamster wheel. So let's look at why we need to address difficult issues promptly. So waiting for a more suitable opportunity results in the issue not being dealt with. So it's really important, if something happens, that absolutely we need to seize the opportunity to deal with that issue there and then. It's really difficult to find data to go back if we don't do that. A problem's not going to usually resolve itself. We talk to lots of line managers who think if we ignore it, it might actually go away, but actually we know that. We know it won't. We know that in our personal life. We need to remember that in our work life. If the manager thinks a problem is temporary, it may reoccur if it's not dealt with. Oh, do you know what? It's just a blip. It'll be fine tomorrow. They'll be back on it. And sometimes that is not the case. Sometimes it can be temporary, but actually thinking about what is a temporary problem, what is something then becomes a recurring behaviour that we're not managing. Not dealing with the issue can lead to further complications, obviously, as well. So making sure that we are actually dealing with the problem so that we're not leading further escalations. So in terms of what we mean by difficult conversation, so here's our description of what that looks like. A difficult or challenging conversation is a conversation where you have to manage emotions and information in a sensitive way. So that's what we talk about when we're talking about what a difficult conversation is. So in terms of, before I go into kind of the 5 steps, so what sort of things might be a difficult conversation? It might be between flexible hours. It might be someone that's actually had, that they're repeatedly late. It could be that someone's actually made a mistake while they're doing a process. So anything where, you know, we need to address a situation. So we've come up with the 5-step process. So let's just work through that now. So firstly, prepare. Investigate, check the facts, think about what location, where you're actually going to have this conversation. If necessary, practice. I have talked to lots of managers, just write a script. If you know it's going to be difficult, spend that time preparing so you're feeling more confident. If you are confident, then you will have more opportunity that that conversation is going to go well and the outcome will be what you need it to be. So consider what outcomes you're expecting. Do not go in there unless you've got that outcome sorted. So communicate, set the tone, think about tone, body language, explain the issue really clearly, clarify that that issue has been understood by the person you're speaking to, and stick to the facts. There is no opinions here. We're just going to give the information that we have. Listening, we talk a lot about active listening. So when we've kind of presented the facts, be patient, let them respond, play back, and then summarize. So we've clarified the communication stage, but actually what we've done is open the opportunity for them to talk to us and then summarize back. So do spend then time, number 4, in exploring, clarify where required, ask those probing questions, give them time to think, you know, using the counting technique if you need to do that silently, and then gather additional information that you might need in order to, in that exploratory process. And then lastly, when we get to kind of agree actions, what are we looking for here? You know, clarify a way forward, make sure that any actions are clear and achievable, go back to the SMART objectives piece that we talk about, own it, explain the support they need, and then agree deadlines. So 1, prepare, 2, communicate, 3, listen, 4, explore, and then 5, agree actions. Every conversation could happen that way, then I think we'd have some fairly good outcomes of those conversations. So I've got an example here that we're going to bring to life. I'm just going to bring it up on my screen just as a quick kind of check back. So I'll let you read that rather than me reading it out. I'll give you a few moments. Okay, so I'll just hand over. So the question is, could this have been handled better? And if so, how? So on reflection, let's just look at ways, hopefully you're all agreeing there, that actually this conversation could have gone better. So we're going to talk about things that went well. Let's start with the positives. So you asked open questions about her welfare and you produced the evidence back to that 5-step plan to back up what you were saying. Things to consider though, did you speak to her as soon, that opportunity piece we talked about, as soon as it happened, did you go into that detail? Did you notice any change in her behaviour or mood? Did you plan? What was the outcome you were expecting and how Jane may react? Did you make her aware that you'd be keeping recording red timekeeping so that when it happens, she knows that absolutely that's something you've been checking? And do you think very clearly about desired outcome ahead of the meeting? So let's think about next time that might happen. Check in with her more regularly. She may need support, but be afraid to ask for it. Make her feel more at ease. That may lead to a more open, honest meeting. Don't wait 6 weeks to raise your concern, because the data may be more difficult to find and people's memories are sometimes shorter than that period or longer that period. If you notice a pattern early on, let her know in advance you'll be tracking the timekeeping. So again, no surprises. And that key stage number 1, plan what you're going to say, plan how you're going to deliver it, and what the outputs should be. So that hopefully just brings to life what we've been talking about in terms of difficult conversations. I haven't met a line manager yet that looks forward to having those conversations, but the quicker that they can happen, the more time spent in actually planning what you're going to say, how you're going to say, and what outcomes you're expecting, honestly, they will go an awful lot better. So what I'm now going to move on to is one-to-ones. We split this webinar into 2 parts. So difficult conversations once, which clearly implies a difficult conversation usually comes out of a negative pathway. And this now is when we start to be a bit more positive and actually thinking about, in order to bring about a really good company culture, we need to have effective one-to-ones. And that's a dual thing. It needs to be managers that actually enjoy going to do one-to-ones, but employees that also, and those team members that actually look forward to it and feel they're really effective. So let's talk in a bit more detail about embedding those one-to-ones. So what does a good one-to-one actually look like? So these can be formal or informal. So let's just talk about kind of some of the principles of what one looks like. So a one-to-one means one-to-one. So there's no guests. It is literally an opportunity for a one-to-one conversation. Depending on your culture of organisation, it might be they're more formal, but actually what it does need to be is relaxed. We will get more out of our people if we have a relaxed and that private environment. Private environment can also mean think about the person we promote in our business, walking one-to-ones. Great, that might be the space. But think about where you're walking, and if it's a busy area, then that might not work and be so conducive to one-to-ones in that space. It's a dedicated time for you to meet, so do make sure it works for them too. So make sure in terms of scheduling of that in there. It is an opportunity. One-to-ones are absolutely about achieving objectives and making sure people are on track, but actually it should be about personal check-in as well to make sure they're okay as well. It's about those objectives, review of successes and any issues, and also any support that is required from the line manager or others to achieve objectives or resolve issues, and then a focus on future objectives. So how are we doing now, but let's have an eye on the future and set those as our future objectives. And then lastly, the 2 elements are the kind of training or any CPD requirements, and then career aspirations. So current, a little bit in terms of future objectives, but also really thinking about that training, CPD and career aspirations. And then lastly, of course, anything else that comes up in our AOB. So in terms of how we embed effective one-to-ones, what we look at is a clear process which ties into company-wide objectives. There needs to be clear roles and responsibilities within the process. Training line managers on how to manage direct reports, back to line managers being really key here. Induct all employees on one-to-one process upon joining, and understand what their role is as well. Sometimes companies focus really highly on line managers being key, as I've just said, but actually forget to train employees on what their input is into the process, so they get the best out of it as well. Commit to a regular schedule where we see it do well is where they're the first week of every month, they're on a Thursday for you. It just means people then are planning, and those recurrent slots really do work. And then make sure you allow enough time and the format actually works, and don't be afraid to change it. You know, it might be your culture's changed. Just think about whether those one-to-ones are still the right way. Do set the tone. It needs to be in the private place. It needs to be professional. It needs to have that supportive personal angle as well. And then lastly, follow up on your commitments to make sure that they are meaningful and action's actually going to happen as a result of the one-to-one. So that's how we talk to our clients. That's how we kind of see it really being effective in terms of those one-to-ones all around the process, all around making sure that everybody understands what their involvement is to have a successful outcome. So I'm just going to round up our session today and look at the key takeaways that we have. So in terms of what we've been talking about, one, take responsibility. Yes, that's line managers, but that's also individuals working in a team as well. Don't ignore issues. Sometimes, most of the time, they're not going to go away. So dealing with them promptly is absolutely the right way to do it. Remain fair and also unbiased. Again, we could talk about that in quite a lot of detail, but this webinar was very much a high level around the two topics, but really making sure that it's that fair, transparent and honest. Do seek advice and training. So, you know, none of us are experts in everything. So if you do come up against something that's a bit more challenging, then either speak to another manager in the team or go to HR, whoever it is you feel gives you a bit more support so you feel more confident in going into that conversation, or indeed successive conversations about the topic. Do follow the process, but also think about whether the process still works. You know, one-to-ones 1 year, we may need to change the process to make sure that we've got a good process that everyone's comfortable with. And then lastly, do commit the time. You know, sometimes when we're, you know, whether it's one-to-ones, we need to make sure that time feels really precious to both parties and we're committing the time. But when it comes back to difficult conversations, sometimes, you know, that initial conversation is not going to be enough to resolve the issue. So do make sure that you've got the time to do any resolution that's needed and make sure that the outcome is right for everybody. So that's a summary of what we've covered off today and our whistle-stop tour of difficult conversations and effective one-to-ones. I'm now going to hand over for any questions. So if you go, those of you that joined us slightly later, if you've got a toolbar and you'll see a Q&A there. So just by all means, just pop a question there or use the chat, and then either Sam or I can answer the question. Just give it a few moments, Sam. I know this is always your favourite bit. See what questions are going to come up. Okay, can't see. Oh, okay, we've got a question coming up. So, what is the legal risk at Tribunal having a toxic culture, please? That's the question. Is that a question come up, Sam?
Yep.
Okay, so I think in terms of that question, so the question that's asked, so what is the legal risk at Tribunal of having a toxic work culture? It's quite, I'm going to try and answer that quite generally, if that's okay. You know, obviously we know from supporting clients and going to Tribunal that there is a risk if it can be demonstrated that an organisation has a toxic work culture, that there is definitely evidence that that could be deemed as a responsibility of the organisation. And earlier I used the example of P&O as obviously a recent one that's in the press at the moment. But I think, you know, it is definitely a factor. So that's how I would interpret that. And what we've seen happen, if the Tribunal can give enough evidence, then that is definitely seen as an area of opportunity that they will seize upon to deem not in the company's favour. Hopefully that answers the question. Anything you'd like to add to that, Sam?
No, but we have just had another question as well, specifically around care and the other steps that we take in terms of tackling Our own culture, just another example. So I'll jump in with just a few things that I know that we commit to doing. So obviously beyond the effective one-to-ones between team members, we have a whole raft of activities and ways of sort of recording and sharing and trying to resolve any issues that we have. So employee opinion survey, that's the key one that we deliver at least twice a year to sort of take, again, quite a high level check and balance as to how people are feeling across the organisation. And then Exco and HR, our internal HR team, are very much accountable for picking up any issues that are submitted at that point and following them through to make sure we don't have any problems. And then we also we've got our own HR department, so we offer very much kind of confidential conversations. So obviously we realise that it's difficult sometimes for line managers to resolve some issues with employees because it can be really emotive, it can be difficult to kind of have that distance. So we very much promote our internal HR team as being that more impartial, slightly, more step back point of contact in terms of any questions or issues that they may have, which can then go around the line manager, especially if there are problems with the line manager. So, it happens absolutely in businesses, it's not an uncommon thing. So we very much offer that to our Curve employees and just continuously communicate that. But also, I think at Curve, we're very lucky because we've got a real open door culture that if they're not comfortable in going to their line manager or HR, there are other relationships across the business and there are other mechanisms they can reach out to get that advice or support as they need it. So there's lots and lots of ways that we try and tackle exactly that internally too. So I hope that was useful.
Thank you. But we have that's 2 questions that have been answered. So thank you very much for answering those. Conscious of time, so we're literally got 1 minute to go. So let's close the webinar now. But we really appreciate you attending today, and also it's great to have some questions at the end. So thank you very much, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.